Today we're going to frame this picture. You're going to need a miter saw, just like this one here. This is the Nobex Proman. That's the one that I use. You're going to need a V-nailer of some sort to join the corners together. This is a V-nailer press. You're also going to need a matte cutting system, and this is the Matte Master system from Frameco. You're also going to need some clamps. These are corner clamps, and this here is a tab gun, and this puts the tabs in after you mount your picture inside the frame to make sure that it doesn't fall out. So after you've got your picture printed, all that's left to do now is to make a frame. Simple, eh? It is pretty simple. I've got 3 clear steps for you to make it really simple for you to make your frame. So the first step before we cut anything is to make sure we work out all our measurements. Once we have all our measurements, then we'll go ahead and we'll cut our picture molding, which is this stuff here. Okay, and that's what we make our frame out of, is this timber sort of stuff. Then what we're going to do is we're going to use our matte board cutter. We're going to cut a mat, which will go over the top, basically frames the picture inside the frame, and then we're going to make a backing board as well to stick the picture onto, and we'll assemble it all together, put it inside our freshly made picture frame with some glass, and then we'll seal off the back and put all the hanging material on it. As you can imagine, getting the measurements right is pretty important. So what I'll do is I'll take you through step by step how I go about ensuring I have all of my measurements right. So let's just draw up a rectangle that is a similar sort of shape and size to the, it's to scale, isn't it? Looks like it is now. But anyway, it's similar to what we've got there. So let's say that's our picture. The first thing to do is we need to measure our picture. That's 329 across in its width. And I'm going to write that on the inside of my diagram. And it's important that I do that so I don't get confused. 482. Now, when it comes to framing your picture, we're going to make a matte board, and a matte board is essentially a window that sits on top of this. So when it's framed, when it's mounted on a backing board, there's a matte board that just slightly overlaps the edges of our picture. I'll typically do 5mm all the way around, 5mm. And the reason I do that is because it just means that I have a lot of room for error if I do accidentally mount it on my backing board just a millimetre or 2 out. If it was more critical, I might only have a 1 or 2mm overlap. But here, because I'm going to have 5mm, if you think about it, I'm going to have 5mm on each long edge, that's 10mm. So my 329 now, I'm now able to make the measurements for my window. My 329 becomes 319. Okay, so this is my window that'll be inside of my matte board, and my long edge will become 472, and that means I've got 5mm of overlap on each end. Now, if I then draw another frame outside of that internal box, this here now, or this area on the outside, this here is my matte board. And after I finish cutting this on my matte cutter, it'll have a nice beveled edge all the way around. The picture sits inside here. This is cardboard, and then on the outside of that, which I'll draw now so you can see, is our mitered frame. So it looks something like that. Okay, so we end up having to cut these 4 pieces out of our moulding, or our picture moulding. So we end up with our picture in the middle, we end up with our matte board, and then we end up with our external frame. Now, if we know that our window in our matte board is going to be 319mm, then all we need to do is we just need to add on the distance from our edge of our window to our frame to get our next measurement, which is the measurement of the internal of the frame and the outside of our matte board. So I'm going to make this 50mm. Now, it's a personal choice as to how wide you want to make this. Some pictures I've done 100mm, some I do 75, quite often I'll do 90, but I'm just going to keep it nice and simple to 50mm so the maths is simple for us as we go through this exercise. So if we know that we're going to add 50mm to each side, that's a total of 100mm. So remember we had 319. Okay, if you remember that was our measurement. We can now go and add 100mm to that. So 419 will be all the way from edge to edge of our matte board. And the same for the height of our image. We're going to add 100mm. So our 472 now becomes 572, all the way to the top and bottom of our matte board. So now what we do is we have our dimensions for our entire matte board, which will also be the dimensions for our backing board because it's going to be the same size. We have the dimensions for the window that we're going to cut out. Now that's actually not important anymore because when you use a mat board system, all you do is once you've cut out the actual mat board is you set the system for 50 millimeters of border and it cuts the window out to the right side. We now need to work out the length of what our frame is going to be. If you have a look in here, there's a rebate and that's where the glass and the mounting sits in. So we know that we need 419 millimeters in there, but because we're going to miter our frame, it's actually going to be longer than that on the outside of the frame. So the way that you work the length out is you actually take the width of the bit from the rebate to the edge of the frame, which on this one is 35 millimeters, which is pretty popular. Yeah, popular. Pretty often it is 35 mil. So we take 35 mil multiplied by 2 gives us 70 millimeters, and what that means is that from the end to end of our miter cuts is going to be the width of the internal of the frame, which is what we picked for our mat board or for our backing board, which is 419 plus 70 millimeters. Okay, so I typically write that on the outside so I know that's the length of my frame from here to here. So 419 plus 70 millimeters is 489. Okay, same on this side here, 572 plus 70 millimeters is going to be 642. Okay, and what that does is that allows for the 35 millimeters of depth inside, because inside the frame you have that rebate. So try not to confuse you too much, but it works out really, really well. So come on, now we've got all the measurements, we can start cutting our frame out. And I always suggest cut your frame first, because if you do get it slightly out, you can adjust the size of your backing board and your mat board. So if you just, let's say you accidentally make it 5 millimeters too small, well, it's easier then to cut your mat board smaller at that point than trying to trim 2 or 3 millimeters off of it. So this is the Nobex ProMen miter saw. I find it works really well. I'll put some descriptions down below to the equipment that I use. Once again, not provided by any companies or endorsed or paid to say anything. It's just the gear that I found works really well. So I'll speed this bit up so you can not have to watch me cut stuff because it takes a little bit of time. Now what I need to do is I need to take my first measurement, and you'll notice I added a clamp there because it just keeps everything nice and still. This clamp that's on this is not really that good. I suggest you grab yourself a good ruler, and so we said that on the bottom of the frame, I've got my frame measurements down here. It was 489, so I don't need to worry about double checking anything. I've got that right, and then I just mark here with my Sharpie like so. And with the miter saw, we're going to have to bring it around like so, and I want to find my little Sharpie mark. We'll clamp that on so it doesn't move and make another cut. It's that simple. So I won't show you how I cut all 4 sides because it's pretty straightforward, but what you want to end up with is you want to be able to put your 4 pieces together and they should fit nice and flush without any weird gaps or anything going on. I actually prepared this one earlier, but I am going to show you how we join the frames together. But this is not what we're going to be using because I've already made this frame. Now the reason I did that was because we need the glue to dry, so that had to be left overnight. So I've already made this frame and left it to dry overnight. You'll see that when you cut your frames, there's quite often you'll see the white wood because it's got like, I think they call it flesh inside. And the way to get around that is you go to your local art store and you buy a marker. Now this is a Copic marker in Africano. That's just a brown. And the reason that I have that is because then what you do is you just purely go along the edges like that and you make those edges the same color. And I have different colors for different timber. But when you butt the edges up, you won't see the white flesh in there when your joints are slightly off. So essentially, it's pretty straightforward. These clamps work really well. You can get any clamp you like. You put your frame in, push your button down, tighten it up so you're happy with it. So as you can see there, that's a really nice joint. It's nice and flat. Where I've coloured it in with that Copic marker, you can't see it. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually drive a V-nail in on the back. I would have put some wood glue in there, but because I'm just showing you what it is that we do, I'm not going to put any wood glue in there. V-nail is a pretty straightforward thing, and you don't need a press like this to put them in. You can buy a tool that will allow you to put your V-nails in without a press. You just use a hammer. I could just use a hammer, but essentially all you're doing is you're just putting these nails in there so it doesn't come apart. And of course, if you put glue in there overnight, it's so strong, incredibly strong. So, you know, it makes it really easy. I'm going to put 3 in today, because normally I'd only put 2. I'm going to put 3 in today because we're not gluing this. But you can see how simple it is, like it's not hard. Now, as I said, you'd normally glue it overnight, but you'll see that that alone has, you know, joined it together just using those V-nails. So that's how simple that part of the process is. You'll end up with a frame that looks something like this. Now that you've got your frame made, you've left it overnight to dry, what we need to do is cut a backing board that we're going to mount our picture to. We need to cut our matte board, which is going to sit on top of our picture and be like an internal frame on top of our photo, and we need to get our glass cut. Now, if you remember, we worked out what the internal measurements were between each edges of the frame. We had 419 millimeters across there, and we had 572 across there. Just a little tip for you that I actually learned the hard way. Take 2 millimeters off of each of those when you get the glass cut and when you start cutting your backing board and your matte board. The reason for that is that if you cut it to the exact width of your frame, and it won't fit in, it's very hard to sand down glass or to trim a little bit off of this backing board. But 2 millimeters won't make any difference to you as far as visually, but it'll make a huge difference in being able to put it together nice and easily. Inside the frame is this rebate of about 5 mil either side, and by taking a millimeter off of each side and the top and the bottom, it makes it really easy to fit your picture in once you make your pictures. So now we have our measurements for our backing board and our glass. I've already gone ahead and I've ordered the glass from the glazier. I have that sitting over there. I'll grab that shortly. These matte systems come with a bevel cut. So this is one that cuts your matte board on an angle, so we don't need that one yet, and with a straight cut. And this is the one that we're going to use. And they have a guide, so you just put it on the guide once you line it up. So I'm just going to line it up where it needs to go. And then all you do is you get this, put it into the guide, and you just cut away. And that's why these cutting systems are just invaluable, as you can see how quickly it was to cut. So I can just line it up with 570 like so. But now we've got our backing board cut, and if I grab my frame, this will fit straight in like so. Okay, so that's my backing board cut. I've got to get some matte board out, and I've got to do the same thing. I've got to cut another piece exactly the same size, but of matte board, and that'll cover it on top, and then I'll cut the window out, and I'll show you how I do that. Now with your matte board, it's always a good idea to cut it upside down. Now the reason for that is, as you drag the blade across it, it will actually mark it. So set it up inside your guide. We want 417. So do all our cutting upside down on the matte board. And that's really important. Cut that down like that. Okay, and that's now cut. Okay, now we haven't marked, the front is nice and pristine, and be really careful with your fingers because it's easy to mark, and if you mark it, you can use an eraser to sort of rub it off. Doesn't matter if it's right on the edges, because that's going to go inside the frame bevel, and the middle bit's going to be cut out, so you don't have to worry about that. But definitely your 50 millimeters that you're keeping, you want to make sure that that stays nice and clean. Turn it back over because we want to work on the back of it. Make sure you got a nice clean surface for it, and we've got to mark out the where we're going to cut the window out of for our picture to show through. Now the way that these matte board systems work, makes it really easy, is I'm just going to set this guide for 50 millimeters, which is right about there. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put my picture in here like so, and I'm going to mark it. And the reason I'm going to do this is it gives me guides when I'm cutting of where to stop and start. Remember, this is the back of the board, so we're not going to see this. This is just on the back. Okay, now if you wanted to double check it, which we can do, I've got the picture there, you can see now that the lines are there, 50 mil all the way around. If we get our photo that we've printed and we put it over it, it should just make those lines disappear. So now we know that, we can stick this back in here like so, and we should put a piece underneath it just to help us out so we're not wrecking our blade, because now it's going to be on an angle. So this here is a bevel cutter, and as you push down on it, you'll see the blade pops out. I don't know how well you can see that, but you line it up on your first line, cut. Oh, I need to push this forward. That was almost a disaster right there. You want to make sure everything's nice and tight and square. And I go all the way up to my guideline, so I wait until that matches that guideline, because you don't want to cut too far, otherwise you're going to end up with a cut that is not going to look good. Okay, so you see that first cut's already done. I'll show you in a second how that's going to look. Do our second cut, same thing. Line this up on the guide, plunge the blade in, hold everything nice and tight, slide up. Same thing, start there, just end on that line there. Last one, same thing, on the line, plunge in. Up to that next line. Okay, and you'll see that we now have a frame. Now this plunge blade that I was just using beveled the edges nicely for me. And if I get my picture, I should be able to put my picture down and put that over the top like that, and that gives you sort of an idea of how it's going to look. I should be able to sit the frame over the top of that, and now our picture is definitely taking shape. Now what I need to do is I need to mount the photo onto my backing board, put my glass in, also mount the matte board as well, put my glass in, and then finish putting it all together. So let's do that. I'm going to work out exactly where to mount my picture. Now the way that I do this, because we're not going to see this this tape here peels off, is I get my frame like that, and I sort of just put it on the mounting board, and I grab a pencil and I just mark the four corners like that. But now you can see I've marked my 4 spots, so I know roughly where to mount my picture. I then get my picture, make sure that it covers over those 4 corners, because we know that's the corners where the mount board goes. Okay, so something like that. And then you want to try and find something heavy to stick in there, like this. Okay, that way you can move it around till you're happy. And it's got these guidelines on to help you. And then just put something sort of heavyish on there, line it all up so you're happy. Then get your matte board, place it over, and just make sure that it covers perfectly. And if it does, what you can do is you can start to assemble your picture. So grab some masking tape and just put a very small amount of it on the very bottom of your picture in a couple of spots so your picture doesn't move. Get the picture, we're going to fold it just back slightly, like so. We're going to then start lifting the edge on this, which is a bit. Now what we want to do is we want to peel this back like so, just far enough that when we bring the picture up, it sticks to the sticky stuff, just here, like that. We can remove this tape now, because we know the picture is straight inside it's going to be straight on our backing board, so remove that tape. If you want to double check one more time, just grab your matte board, lay it over the top just to check, and it's all good. So now what we need to do is we need to start removing the sticky backing tape. Make sure your hand's nice and clean. I usually wear some cotton gloves, but they're upstairs, so we're just going to go with this. All right, so now that picture is 100% done, the only thing left to do now is we just need to place our matte board onto this, and we need it to be nice and centered, so we've got to be careful. I want to make sure that it's not overhanging anywhere, and then we, once again, making sure not to get the matte board dirty, just stick that down. Now that is, I can see a bit of dirt there, so just use your eraser where you need to, but make sure the eraser dust or no dust goes inside. You can see there's a bit there, and that'll be a real bugger if you put your glass in and your frame is done and there's some stuff inside. You've got to take it apart to get it out, and it's not easy to do. Alright, so that's our picture now, framed up with a matte board. Looks good. That should sit inside our frame without any problems, like so. Oh, that's looking really good. Yeah, perfect. Look at that. So all we need to do now is add some glass, and this is our glass here. As I said, I always get it 2mm shorter, same as I've just cut everything else. I pre-order it from a local glazier. They're really good. We'll put the glass in our frame. It's very clean when it comes from them, so just pop it in like so, just to make sure there's no dust in there. Okay, I also do the same to the front of the photo, and then I just stick it in like that. So we have our picture all mounted. We have our mat board mounted. We have our glass in there. All that's left to do now is make sure that it doesn't fall out. That's where this tool here comes in. This is the tab driver, and it puts the tabs in around the sides. And it's pretty simple to use, just like a staple gun. Stick it in, and it shoots a tab in there for you. And it just means that that picture is not coming back out. Once you do this, this is it. So I just put 4 in, and then what I do is I flip it over and I just double check that there is nothing inside the glass, because if something's in there and you do it all up, it's a real pain to take apart. So just inspect it all now that you can flip it over without it falling out. It's all good. And then I just go ahead and I just finish it off like this. And as you can see, it's a pretty quick job if you have the right tools. It's not hard to do either, and very rewarding. And there you go. I mean, that's it. It's a framed picture, Cradle Mountain. Great memories from Tasmania. Once we've used this to put the tabs in, I then get this picture framing tape. You've probably seen it before. And just go around the edges and seal it all off. Looks just as professional as the front. All that's left to do now is put some mounting hardware on there, and you can choose what it is, whether it's a hook up the top, whether you choose what it is you want. But it's a pretty straightforward process, and if you think about it in those few steps, get your measurements right, make your frame, cut your backboard out, cut your mat board out, mount your picture, get your glass cut, and away you go. You've got a beautifully framed picture. You've got your artwork to hang up on the wall and to be able to enjoy. For and if someone comes around and says, geez, I love that picture, you can just take it off the wall and give it to them. What a great gift. If you've enjoyed the video, make sure you give it the thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, and until next time, get out there and take some photos that you can frame.